My mother-in-law was choking on her own breath in my kitchen, and my wife was upstairs deciding which earrings matched her dress. I ran to the garage, but my truck battery was dead. I'd left the dome light on the night before. So I sprinted back inside, up the stairs two at a time, and begged my wife for her car keys. She looked at me in the mirror, adjusted a diamond stud, and said her car was getting detailed that afternoon, and she wasn't about to let it smell like a hospital. She told me to call an ambulance and stop being dramatic. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "Understood," and walked back downstairs. 3 days later, she was the one screaming into the phone, begging me to stop what I'd already set in motion. Before I tell you exactly how her entire world came apart, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And if you believe kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. My name is Walter. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my adult life, people have called me a patient man. Slow to anger, slower to hold a grudge. I built a small chain of hardware stores from a single rented storefront in a strip mall, and I did it by staying calm when everyone around me panicked. That patience served me well in business. It nearly cost me everything at home. It was a Thursday evening in early October, the kind of evening where the light turns gold and everything feels, for a moment, like it's going to be fine. I'd just gotten back from the third store, the one out past the interstate, and I was looking forward to a quiet dinner. My wife, Renata, was getting ready for a gala at the country club, some fundraiser for the Historical Society, the kind of event where the actual history being preserved is mostly just an excuse for people to wear expensive clothes and drink expensive wine. Renata's mother, Doris, had been staying with us for about 6 weeks. Doris was 81, sharp-tongued and sharper-minded, a retired schoolteacher who'd spent 40 years correcting other people's grammar and had never quite stopped. She had a heart condition, nothing that should have been fatal if managed properly, but her cardiologist had warned us that stress and exertion needed to be kept to a minimum. She was staying with us while her assisted living facility dealt with a mold problem in her unit. 6 weeks had turned into 2 months, and honestly, I didn't mind. I liked having her around. She told good stories, and she never let me win at gin rummy. That evening, I was in the garage checking the oil in my truck when I heard Doris's voice come from the kitchen, thin and strained, calling my name. Not Renata's name. Mine. I dropped the dipstick and ran. She was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short, ragged pulls like she couldn't quite get enough air into her lungs. Her lips had a grayish tinge I didn't like at all. "Walter!" she gasped. "My chest, it feels like someone's standing on it." I got her into a kitchen chair, loosened the collar of her blouse, and told her to breathe slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way you're supposed to. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't, because I'd learned a long time ago that panic is contagious and so is calm, and I wanted her to catch the second one from me. I went for my keys and remembered my truck battery had died overnight. I'd left an interior light on, a stupid, ordinary mistake, the kind that means nothing on a normal day and everything on a day like this one. The nearest working vehicle in the house was Renata's Lexus, freshly detailed for the gala, keys sitting in a little bowl by the front door. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Renata was at her vanity, clipping in an earring, already half dressed for the evening in a burgundy gown that probably cost more than my first car. "Renata, I need your keys. Your mother's having chest pains. She can't breathe right. I have to get her to the ER now." She met my eyes in the mirror rather than turning around. "I just had that car detailed this morning, Walter. It's spotless. I am not hauling her to the hospital and having her get sick in my seats." She turned back to the earring. "Call 911. That's what they're for. I have to be at the club in 40 minutes. I stood there for a second, waiting for her to say she was joking. She didn't. "Renata, she might be having a heart attack. Then the paramedics will know what to do," she said, standing, smoothing the front of her dress. "I'm not a nurse, Walter. Figure it out." And she walked past me, toward her closet, already thinking about shoes. I didn't yell. I want to be very clear about that, because I know what you're expecting me to say, that I screamed, that I called her something ugly, that we had it out right there in the bedroom. I didn't. Something in me went very still and very quiet, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I just looked at her and said, "Okay." One word. And then I went downstairs and called 911. And I held Doris's hand and talked to her about her rose garden until the ambulance arrived. And I followed it to the hospital in my neighbor's car, because that's who I called. Instead of waiting on a jump, start a neighbor, not my own wife. Doris was stabilized within the hour. Not a heart attack, thank God. Severe angina brought on by a medication interaction her regular doctor hadn't caught, compounded by stress. She'd be fine. She'd need monitoring, a med adjustment, a few days of rest. But she was going to be fine. Renata texted me at 9:47 that night. "How's mom?" Gala was a bit much, home now, exhausted. Not "is she alive?" Not "I'm sorry I couldn't help." Just an update request, like she was checking on a delayed flight. I didn't respond right away. I sat in that hospital waiting room chair, and I thought about 15 years of marriage, and I thought about all the ways a person can be present in a house without ever actually being present for the people in it. And somewhere in that thinking, a very small, very cold thought settled into place, and it didn't leave. I said okay to Renata that night, but okay didn't mean what she thought it meant. I brought Doris home 2 days later, set her up in the guest room with her meds organized in one of those daily pill sorters, and told her to rest. Renata was polite to her mother in that performative way. People are polite to house guests. They resent bringing her tea, asking if she needed anything. All surface. No warmth underneath. I watched it happen and said nothing, because I was watching something else entirely now. I was watching Renata. It started with small things. She'd always handled our household bills. I trusted her with it the same way I trusted her with most things, because for the first 10 years of our marriage, that trust had never once been misplaced. But lately, she'd gotten cagey about the laptop, closing it fast when I walked into the room, taking calls from an unfamiliar number out on the back porch with the door shut. I told myself it was probably nothing. Menopause, stress, maybe planning a surprise for my birthday. I am, by nature, a man who assumes the best. Then, about 10 days after the hospital, I went looking for a property tax statement in the file cabinet in my home office, the one Renata almost never touched, because she found the whole subject boring. Tucked behind the folder I wanted was a slim manila envelope I didn't recognize, unlabeled, out of place. I want to tell you I hesitated before opening it. I didn't. Inside were photocopies of loan documents. Not documents from any lender I recognized, a private lending outfit, the kind that specializes in bridge loans for people who can't get approved anywhere legitimate. The loan was for $340,000. The collateral listed was our second commercial property, the warehouse I used for overflow inventory, the one held free and clear in my name, the one Renata had no legal claim to whatsoever. And at the bottom of the application, my signature. I stared at it a long time. I've signed my name probably 40,000 times in my life. Checks, contracts, permission slips, mortgage papers. I know exactly how my hand moves when I sign. The W leans right and then catches itself. The tail on the R drags a half-inch too far, always has, since I was a kid trying to write like my father. This signature had the lean, it had the drag, it was, in every visible respect, mine. Except I had never seen this document before in my life. I sat at my desk for a long time with that envelope open in front of me, and I felt something shift in my chest, not panic, something colder and more useful than panic. I thought about the closed laptop. I thought about the phone calls on the porch, and I thought about Renata's face in that mirror, telling me to figure it out myself, while her mother gasped for air one floor below. I didn't confront her. Not yet. A man who confronts too early only teaches his opponent to hide better. I photographed every page of that loan file with my phone, put the originals back exactly where I'd found them, down to the angle they were sitting at, and I went back to my daily life like nothing had happened. I coached my grandson's Little League practice that Saturday. I went to church on Sunday. I smiled at Renata across the dinner table and asked how her week was going, and she told me it was fine, just fine, nothing new, and I nodded and said that was good to hear. The following Monday, I called Priya Anand. Priya had been my corporate attorney for almost a decade, sharp as a blade and about twice as patient. A woman who'd untangled 2 supplier lawsuits and a zoning dispute for me without ever once raising her voice. I laid the documents on her desk and told her what I'd found and where. She went quiet for a long moment, turning the pages slowly. "Walter," she finally said, "this signature is a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. Real signatures have natural variation pressure changes, Tiny inconsistencies in speed. This one is identical in 3 separate places, down to the pixel. That doesn't happen. Someone traced this from a scanned original and reproduced it digitally. Can you find out who applied for the loan? I can find out a great deal more than that, she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of professional hunger, the look of someone who'd just been handed a puzzle worth solving. Give me a week. It took her 4 days. The private lender's paperwork listed a co-signer on the loan application, someone whose income and assets were meant to backstop mine in case of default, since the collateral property was, on paper, only recently transferred into a joint holding structure that didn't actually exist. The co-signer's name was Bradley Kessler, my stepson. I should explain Bradley. He was 31 years old, Renata's son from her first marriage, and for the last 4 years he'd been running what he called a boutique investment consultancy out of a rented office downtown, which as far as I could tell, mostly consisted of Bradley wearing expensive watches and posting inspirational quotes about grinding and hustling while his actual client list stayed suspiciously thin. I'd fronted him $60,000 2 years earlier to help him get the business off the ground, money I never expected back. Money I gave because Renata asked me to, and because I liked the idea of helping a young man find his footing. That business, as far as I could tell, had been quietly failing for over a year. He'd never told his mother. He definitely never told me. Priya's investigator, a forensic accountant she brought in named Marcus Webb, traced the $340,000 loan straight into an account under Bradley's consultancy, moved out within 9 days into a mix of operational expenses that included a leased Range Rover, a retainer to a marketing firm, and a deposit on a condo downtown that Bradley had apparently been telling people was his own. All cash, all earned. It wasn't earned. It was stolen. Stolen from a warehouse I'd built with 40 years of 6-day work weeks, with a forged signature that my own wife had helped manufacture. I asked Marcus how confident he was that Renata had known. He showed me the phone records Priya's team had subpoenaed once we filed the fraud complaint, 11 calls between Renata and the private lender in the 6 weeks before the loan closed, and a text exchange between Renata and Bradley that Priya's team recovered from a cloud backup, where Renata wrote, "In words I will remember for the rest of my life. He'll never notice. He doesn't even look at that warehouse paperwork anymore. Just get me the scan of his signature from the boat sale contract and I'll handle the rest." She had used my own signature from a document I'd signed in good faith 2 years earlier selling an old fishing boat to forge federal adjacent lending paperwork and steal $250,000 from a property I'd spent half my life paying off. And she had done it roughly 3 weeks after telling me to figure it out myself while her own mother sat gasping in my kitchen. There's a particular kind of anger that doesn't look like anger at all. It looks like stillness. That's the kind I felt. I didn't want to just expose this and let a court sort it out over 18 months while Renata cried on the stand about being a devoted mother who made one mistake for her son. I wanted her to understand completely and unmistakably, in real time, exactly what she had done and exactly what it was going to cost her. So Priya and I built a plan, and it took 6 weeks of quiet, careful work. First, we secured the warehouse. Priya filed an emergency lien and fraud affidavit that froze any further action on the property and put the lender on formal notice that the loan had been secured through forgery, which meant the lender's own attorneys started circling Renata and Bradley like sharks that smell blood, since the lender now stood to lose $340,000 with nothing to show for it but a criminal referral. Second, I quietly moved forward on a full financial separation. Priya connected me with a divorce attorney named Grace Halloran, and together they confirmed what I'd hoped our prenuptial agreement, signed 15 years earlier at my own father's insistence, God rest him, contained an explicit fraud and misconduct clause. Any spouse found to have committed financial fraud against the marital estate or a spouse's separate property forfeited any claim to alimony or division of assets tied to that fraud. My father used to say a handshake means nothing to a person who's already decided to lie to you, and you build your contracts for the version of a person you hope you'll never meet. Turned out he was right about Renata 15 years before I ever needed to be. Third, and this part mattered most to me, I made sure Doris knew none of this was going to touch her. Doris was innocent in all of it, more innocent than anyone, and she deserved to keep her home with us regardless of what happened to her daughter. I sat with her one evening on the back porch, just the two of us, and I told her everything. I watched her face go through disbelief, then grief, then something that looked almost like relief. Like a woman finally allowed to admit what she'd suspected about her own daughter for years, but never had the proof or the standing to say out loud. She was always like this, Doris said quietly, looking out at the yard. Even as a girl, if something wasn't convenient for her, it simply wasn't her problem. I used to think she'd grow out of it. She reached over and patted my hand, the same way she'd patted it that night at the hospital while we waited for her test results. I'm sorry you married into it, Walter. I'm sorry it took my chest pains to show you what she really is. It's not your fault, Doris, I told her. None of this is your fault. You're staying right here. That's not up for discussion. She cried a little then, and so did I, honestly, though I'm not in the habit of admitting that to a camera. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon, and I chose the setting on purpose. I invited Renata and Bradley both to the house, under the pretense of a family dinner. Doris was doing better, I told Renata, and I wanted us all together to celebrate. Renata seemed almost pleased, like she thought this meant things were smoothing back over, like her silence and my calm these past weeks meant I'd simply decided not to make a fuss. She wore a nice dress. Bradley showed up 20 minutes late in a car I now knew he couldn't actually afford, talking loudly about a new deal he was closing. Priya and Grace were both already in my study, watching on the house monitors, along with two men from a private security firm I'd retained, standing quietly by the front gate, out of sight from the driveway. I let dinner happen first. I wanted Renata relaxed. I asked about her week. I complimented Bradley's tie. And then, once the plates were cleared, I asked them both to join me in the study, and I watched something flicker behind Renata's eyes. Not fear yet, just a faint, animal awareness that something in the room had changed. Priya laid the documents on the table one at a time. The loan application. The forged signature, blown up beside the genuine one from the boat sale contract. The identical pixel-for-pixel match circled in red. The wire transfers. And finally, the text message he'll never notice. He doesn't even look at that warehouse paperwork anymore, printed in black and white and placed directly in front of Renata's folded hands. I watched the color drain out of her face in real time, the way it does when a person realizes the version of events they'd rehearsed in their head no longer has anywhere to go. Walter, she started. I can explain. You're not going to explain to me, I said. My voice was flat and even, the way I'd trained it to be over 6 weeks of waiting for this exact moment. You're going to explain to the fraud investigator from the state attorney's office who called me yesterday, because the lending company already filed a criminal referral once their own compliance team caught the forgery. I didn't even have to push that door open, Renata. You built it yourself and then walked straight through it. Bradley shot up out of his chair so fast it nearly tipped over. I didn't forge anything. That was her. I swear to God, I didn't know where the signature came from. She told me you'd already agreed. Sit down, Bradley, Priya said, not unkindly, but with the specific weight of a woman who has spent a career watching people try to talk their way out of documented evidence. Ignorance of forgery isn't a defense to knowingly receiving stolen funds across a fraudulent loan you personally co-sign. We have the emails where you and your mother discussed getting Walter to sign off weeks before that loan closed. You knew exactly what this was. Renata was crying now, the kind of crying that comes fast and desperate once a person understands there's no longer an audience left to perform for. I did it for him, she said, gesturing at Bradley. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child fail, Walter. You don't have children of your own. You don't know. That landed exactly the way she meant it to land. A low blow aimed at an old wound, and for 1 second it worked. It actually hurt. And then I thought about Doris gasping at my kitchen counter and Renata clipping in an earring in the mirror, telling me it wasn't her problem. And the hurt turned back into that same cold stillness. You told me my truck breaking down on the one day your mother's heart decided to act up wasn't your problem, I said. But somehow stealing $340,000 from a warehouse I built with my own hands, using a forged version of my signature, to bail out a business you'd been hiding the failure of for over a year, that was worth the risk. I understand exactly what kind of mother you are, Renata. I finally understand exactly what kind of wife you've been too. Grace slid the divorce filing across the table next to the fraud documents. Given the fraud clause in your prenuptial agreement, she said to Renata, you're not entitled to spousal support, and any assets traceable to funds obtained through fraud will be subject to full restitution on top of whatever the state pursues criminally. I'd strongly suggest retaining your own counsel immediately, though I should tell you, most reputable firms will decline once they see this file. Renata looked at me, mascara running, the diamond studs from that gala still in her ears. And for a moment, I almost saw the woman I married 15 years ago underneath all of it. Almost. Please, she whispered. Please, Walter. I'll pay it back. I'll fix this. Just make it go away. I'm not making anything go away, I said, standing. You made your choice in my kitchen the night your mother could barely breathe. I'm just letting you live inside the choice you already made. I nodded to the security team outside. Two officers from the county sheriff's financial crimes unit were waiting at the curb, coordinated in advance with the state attorney's office once the criminal referral had gone through. This wasn't a scene I staged for drama. It was simply the natural, legal conclusion of what she and Bradley had built for themselves. I watched from the porch as they were both read their rights on my driveway, Bradley sobbing that this wasn't fair. Renata silent now, staring at nothing. I want to tell you there was some great satisfaction in that moment, some fireworks going off feeling of victory. There wasn't. There was only a very quiet, very clean sense of a door finally closing on something that should have been shut a long time ago. The months that followed were, as Priya put it, a masterclass in consequences arriving exactly on schedule. Renata pled to reduce charges in exchange for cooperating fully against Bradley, since the state's attorney made clear the paper trail against her was already airtight. Without her help, the police saved her from the harshest sentencing, but not from a felony fraud conviction. 3 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and the complete forfeiture of any marital claim under our prenup. Bradley wasn't as lucky. His consultancy was already collapsing under its own weight before any of this happened, and once his assets were frozen pending trial, the leased Range Rover went back to the dealership, the downtown condo deposit was seized as recoverable proceeds, and his handful of remaining clients pulled out overnight once his name showed up in the local business journal under a headline about federal wire fraud. The divorce was finalized in under 4 months, astonishingly fast for how much money had been involved, mostly because Renata's own attorney advised her there was simply nothing left to fight over. She kept her car, the same one she'd refused to let Doris ride in, and very little else. I heard through mutual friends, months later, that she and Bradley were sharing a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of town, that the two of them barely spoke, that Bradley blamed her for the forged signature getting traced back to a document she should have picked more carefully, and she blamed him for a business that never should have existed in the first place. Two people who'd spent years building an entire identity around what other people's money could buy them, finally left alone with nothing but each other and the wreckage. Doris stayed with me. That was never a question, not for either of us. Once her assisted living unit was cleared of the mold issue, I offered to help her move back, and she looked at me like I'd suggested something faintly ridiculous. Why on earth would I go back there, she said, when you've got a perfectly good guest room and you actually listen when I talk? So she stayed, and we settled into something neither of us expected, but both of us, I think, needed an old man and an older woman. Sharing a house, sharing dinners, sharing the particular quiet comfort of two people who'd both been underestimated by the same person and come out the other side of it intact. I sold the warehouse eventually, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to look at it anymore and think about what it had almost cost me. I used part of the proceeds to expand my third store and part of it to set up a small trust for Doris, so that whatever happened to me, she'd never again be dependent on anyone who saw her as an inconvenience. Last Sunday, I drove her out to the botanical gardens on the edge of town, the ones with the rose walks she used to talk about from her own mother's garden when she was a girl. I pushed her wheelchair slow along the paved path, and she pointed out varieties by name the way she used to correct her students' grammar, with total, easy confidence. The late afternoon light was doing that gold thing it does in October, the same light that had been in the sky the evening this whole story started. Doris reached over and patted my hand on the wheelchair handle. The exact same gesture from that night in the hospital, except this time there was nothing to be afraid of underneath it. "You did good, Walter," she said, not looking at me, just watching the roses. "Better than she ever deserved you being." I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. And I thought about how strange it is that the worst night of my life, my mother-in-law struggling to breathe, my own wife telling me it wasn't her problem, turned out to be the night that finally showed me the truth, 3 weeks before I found the proof of it sitting in a manila envelope in my own filing cabinet. If there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to take with them, it's this. Pay close attention to what a person does in the moment they think nothing is at stake. Not what they say when they're trying to look good for a crowd. not what they promise you during the easy years. Watch what they do when someone they claim to love is struggling to breathe right in front of them, and the only cost of helping is a little bit of inconvenience. That's not a small moment. That's the whole person standing right there in front of you, showing you exactly who they are. I spent 15 years not wanting to see it. It only took one Thursday evening for me to finally understand I'd been looking away from the truth the entire time. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had a moment like that, a single decision that told you everything you needed to know about someone. And if this story meant something to you, stay close, because I've got more of them to tell.